quite some time since I was here. Distinguished guests, who are, of course, survivors, second generation, third generation survivors, and other interested and I think committed observers, which I think is the rest of us. The most important slide of all, actually, was the slide that preempted this. The Glasgow Jewish community remembers. And that's very much the core of actually my paper for you this evening. It's not just simply about NaziLooted Art and how we address that, but it's taking the wider context of what that actually means and how we can actually exploit this extremely sad and distressing state of affairs for a communal benefit and a wider communal benefit in terms of other communities. And that's basically the core, if you like, of what I'd like to talk about this evening. I haven't joined in the political debate, even though I've said Glasgow, Scotland, United Kingdom. Although it was tempting. I've said that because it is Glasgow, but also tonight it's Scotland, it's the United Kingdom, and it's a civilized world. And Yom Hashoah is really, apart from the acts themselves in terms of the tragedy of 75 years ago, it was founded in April 1951. It's only 63 years old. And that's why I say that the most important slide of all, perhaps, is the Glasgow Jewish community, or other Jewish communities, remember. How on earth are we going to ensure that we remember in 50 years' time, in 100 years' time, in 200 years' time, in 500 years' time? And that revolves, again, central to my thinking in terms of this exercise. Let me tell you, if I may, a little bit about Ben Uri. Does anybody, who knows about Ben Uri here? Okay, well, we have a great minority, that's true. Thank you for all my three friends. But that's fine, I understand. Ben Uri was founded, as my young colleagues very elegantly described, in 1915. It was founded by a Russian Jewish emigre artist who came from Paris. And what makes it remarkable is that in 1915, in the East End of London, in the Jewish ghetto, there happened to be a war on. In the second year of the First World War, in a ghetto, were not founded by the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, or any of the other great Jewish dynasties. It was actually founded by artisans, leather makers, shoemakers, dressmakers, people who didn't work for themselves, worked for other people. But there was a farthing here and maybe half a pence here, and one inspirational artist who was an emigre. Came from Lithuania. I may just add an extremely excellent place to come from originally. Through Paris, where we discovered later on that he shared a flat with Jacques Lipchitz, the famous sculptor, and clearly inspired a hugely concentrated small group of people in Whitechapel to create an art society. It was actually originally called the Ben Uri Art and Literary Society. And what makes it interesting is that it was created because there was a wall. It wasn't a glass ceiling, it was a glass wall. Jewish artists in Whitechapel, no matter how talented, couldn't get an exhibition in the West End. And when this guy arrived, and after he came from Paris, and he said, well, where are you guys exhibiting? No doubt in some form of broken Russian or Yiddish. And they said, well, we exhibit here in our homes because we can't get across the river, we can't get into the West End. So it was founded against persecution, basically. Discrimination, certainly, if not some form of persecution. And it carried on being the central function of London's Jewish community right through to the 1970s. But in the 1970s, the final walls of emancipation fell over, disintegrated in Great Britain. And there was no need for a Ben-Uri, because a Jewish artist who was any good had a whole stream of galleries now wanting to represent them. And if the Jewish artist didn't have that whole stream of galleries representing them, it wasn't because they were Jewish. So the core principle of establishing Ben-Uri essentially became very diluted, and with that, the audience and the need for it. And in 1995, the Great Synagogue in Dean Street closed, because of course the Jewish community had moved from that part of central London, and Ben-Uri with it. When I got involved, the issue was not should we, because initially my response was we shouldn't. Because usually when things have their day, they've had their day. But then when I and some friends and colleagues saw the collection, we realized that this had to be reborn. We had to give it a new lease of life for the 21st century. But the question was, how? Why? And we concluded, like anything, that if you're going to create something for a second century, it has to have, more than anything else, value and distinctiveness. Because if it doesn't add value, there's no point. And if it's not distinctive, there's equally no point. So when we sat down and really debated hard over quite a period of time, that if we were going to tackle this, if we were going to try and actually recreate Ben-Uri in a different mold, maintaining its cultural heritage and its religious heritage and its artistic heritage, but reshaping it for a new world, it had to be distinctive. It had to add value. And simply hanging magnificent paintings, I could be a bit biased, but pretty magnificent paintings, doesn't wash. Because we're in London. We have the National Gallery, we have Tate Modern, Tate Britain, we have any number of great galleries. And as Norman Rosenthal once said to me when I was arguing with him about a particular point, he said to me, David, he said, London doesn't need another museum. It doesn't need another gallery. It needs another gallery like it needs another Italian restaurant. But somebody else argued with him and said that the Italian restaurants are opening every day, and it's the best and fittest that will survive. And if Ben-Uri can be the best and fittest, it will survive. And that was in many ways, if you like, part of our inspiration. So what made Ben-Uri different? We had a marvelous collection, but we needed to engage mainstream audiences with it. Because the Jewish community in London is too small. In London is too small. Only 200,000 members of the Jewish community in London. So we had to add on not only audience, but we had to add on dynamics that would make Ben-Uri valuable to our community and all the communities around us. And the two major areas that we chose was one, social health, and the second was NaziLooted Art. Social health because there was already anecdotal evidence that art can actually influence for the good people with special learning difficulties, and as we've been concentrating on for the last 5 years now, dementia and elderly people who have got their own problems, particularly loneliness. The NaziLooted Art issue was particularly close to my heart, principally because I had an experience where I had to work in my collection that actually shouldn't have been in my collection. And it was bought completely legitimately, perfectly innocently, but it turned out to actually be somebody else's. And that created a moral issue. Because I paid for it. I bought it, it was mine. And legally in the United Kingdom, it was mine. But morally it wasn't. And I felt, and that started to get me involved, and I felt that the museum had a real opportunity to make a difference in this area. Now, we are a British museum. We do not get involved in issues of restitution. That is a legal issue between the heirs of a work, or the presumed heirs, or the claimants of a work, and the institutions and museums that have the work. But what Ben-Uri has done is we have promulgated the issue of provenance research. We supported it in the UK, we supported it internationally. We held a conference, we were invited to hold a conference at MoMA in New York, where we beat the drum and we say to museums across the world, research your collection for the history of works between 1933 and 1945 and publish it. And that's as far as our line goes. We daren't go 1 centimetre past that line. It's not the museum's business, but it is the museum's business, principally because Britain is a signatory to the Washington Principles, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a few minutes, where that is a core part of the deal. Where did that lead us to? It led us to, again, from a distinctive point of view, we had to be presenting ourselves as differently. So we had to build our reputation within the museum sector, and then when we felt comfortable and confident that we had that, we could then tilt the marketing, we could tilt the branding, we could tilt the programming, and we've now for a number of years solely focused as art, identity, and migration. And in case you think it doesn't get you into any bother, I'd just like to share with you that I have one piece of fame which I had never particularly wanted, and that is that we put up we decided, given the media frenzy about immigration, which seems to have shifted from perfectly legitimate concerns and about how one deals with immigration to immigrants. And that's a fundamental difference, and it's a dangerous shift if it's not actually addressed and controlled. So we put up as a response, we put up an opening page on our website, and we said that, and we showed various artists, we showed 6 artists who were not born in the UK, but who came to the UK as immigrants and became British artists. And we said, Ben Uri, like other great British art museums in the United Kingdom, celebrate and collect these great British artists. Created havoc, as the internet can do, and there was police involved, we were under threat, we were told that it was Ben Uri who was promulgating all these immigrants coming in. It was remarkable, it's completely unbelievable. So we had various advice from CST, we had various advice from the Metropolitan Police, and we decided that we would deal with it in a very natural and cautious way, so we doubled the amount of artists that we have on our front page, and we're still here to tell the tale. Okay. NaziLooted Art, facts, law, and the moral imperative. So what I'm going to try and do is to put this into some context for you. First of all, let me explain that NaziLooted Art, as far as the Nazi regime is concerned, was actually a multifaceted strategy. First of all, there was a lot of money in it. It was easy money. It wasn't locked in bank vaults, it was hanging on people's walls. And the Germans needed money. They had a war machine to fund. So the first thing to understand is that this was a very practical, strategic policy. Cynical, commercial, and it's not just art. They stole books. It was the greatest grand larceny ever recorded in history. They took the lead off church roofs, they took the bells off churches, they literally, if it didn't move and was worth money, they invested their resources in removing it and taking it and selling it, or if they happened to fancy it for themselves, keeping it. So that's number one. Number two is that it fitted very nicely into a broader strategy. The broader strategy was that within the whole war machine strategy, they wished to eliminate the Jewish race. In total. And what greater and more effective way of doing that than to eliminate all traces of Jewish cultural heritage? So it was a very serious, meticulously planned, meticulously executed strategy. We will not only, with the final solution, wipe out the people, but to wipe out the people and leave the cultural heritage leaves a live residue. It had to be done in tandem, simultaneously. And just to give you a measure of the quantities that we're talking about, art historians believe that we're talking about 250,000 artworks, just artworks, between 1933 and 1945. If you include books, manuscripts, artifacts, you're talking in the millions. It's considered to be that the value, or the quantity first of all, that was stolen from Europe was roughly 1/5 of all the artworks that existed in Europe at that time. 1/5, 20% of all the artworks the Nazis looted. The value, can you hear me all right? Yes? The value is estimated at the time at £2.5 billion. Today that would be worth, in art terms, it's estimated to be worth something like £150 billion. Numbers which are simply, like the Holocaust itself, just inconceivable. Let me quickly run through. What I didn't want to do this evening was to give you a beautiful PowerPoint presentation and show you some wonderful paintings that were stolen and all the different aspects of how to get them back and all the different problems, and it would be very entertaining, very nice, and then everybody leaves and generally forgets most of it apart from the image of the great Picasso or the great Chagall. I think tonight's far too important for that. But the Nazis, from Hitler down, loved their art. No question. Please. The exhibition that my young colleagues talked about, which was 1937-38, started off in Munich. Actually, if I can just clarify it wasn't actually for Linz. This artwork was not destined for Linz. Linz was the dream of Hitler. In Vienna, he was going to recreate the National Gallery of all national galleries. Remember, his view was that he was going to own Europe, so it had to be something remarkably special. And I can assure you that Antarctica Kunst was not about what was going to Linz. This was, as far as they were concerned, seriously degenerate. And they may have had it in their own collections. That's a different issue. But as far as Linz was concerned, none of this was actually designed for Linz. But as my colleagues did say, it was the most successful exhibition Germany had had in 20 years. Because what a wonderful opportunity for the general public to see unbelievable artworks, even though there was graffiti written all over the walls it was basically described as being just horrible rubbish, which of course the general public actually didn't buy at all because they were actually taking the opportunity to go and see the art exhibition. But the Nazi propaganda used it that they were all in favor and wanted to see it all go, etc. Next one, please. And this is what Linz would have looked like. This was classic, the German dream. Stunning, beautiful, classic gallery. Next one, please. How did they sell it? After all, to have it, because they were completely indiscriminate, by the way. They didn't train their special agents as to which ones to choose and which ones not to choose. They were a Hoover. It was a Hoover machine. They took everything, literally everything. And what's most amazing is they documented everything that they took. And very often works were moved out because there were many commercial animals, so if they didn't think that a Van Gogh would sell so well in Munich or in Berlin, they moved it to Switzerland. And this is an auction where that was happening. And just so you understand, because I'd hate you to be under any misapprehension, these auctions were absolutely, completely, perfectly organized as long as the people in the room bought the paintings that they wanted to buy at a price that they wanted to pay. It was an unusual means of auctioneering, but nonetheless it suited exactly what they wanted to do. So if they didn't want it, it was sold for the highest price possible because it was the German Nazi war machine that was getting the benefit. But if Goering or Hitler or any of the other upper echelons actually wanted a piece, then it was arranged that nobody would bid against them. Next one, please. No, back, please. Back. One more, that's it. Why on earth, would you say, have I got a picture of a steaming, teeming Argyle Street on a busy Saturday afternoon? Because in 20 years' time, or 25 years' time, maybe 50, please God, 50 years' time, there won't be any more survivors. And there may not be that many second-generation survivors. And we talk about Glasgow Jewish community remembers. But going forward, we have to think about how communities will remember, if they remember. Because if it's simply a memory, then memories are fast and furious. But if we can add a memory and a call to action, then that memory really does become valuable and becomes robust and becomes an inspiration to others. And who need it be? Who is the audience? Tonight it's the Jewish community. National Holocaust Day is the general community. But going forward, it's these people. It's people who actually have no idea about this. Because it's these people that 70 years ago actually believed Adolf Hitler. They were inspired by the oratory, the charisma of Hitler, when he told them that he can change their lives. And we have somebody to blame. What better thing to do? What better promise is there that we can change your lives for the better and we have somebody to blame? But if we can plan the future, at least try to plan the future, where the message about Holocaust, about genocide, about man's inhumanity to man, about the moral imperative, about morality, about what's right and what's wrong, then maybe the ordinary person won't buy into the demagogue, the orator, the charismatic leader who wants to take them somewhere where they actually hadn't thought of going, and accept what that leader tells them to do. Because that's the challenge, in my judgment, of this whole issue. It's not just about memory, it's about what we do with that memory and who actually feels ownership of that memory. These are soldiers. We've had our young colleagues describe it. Next one, please. There's Ike looking completely amazed at what he's seeing. Next one, please. There's the great Wenmar, beautifully hung in a coat bunker. Ben Uri has been showing an exhibition around the world called the Reclaiming Gallery Stern, Auction 392. Let me just spend a few minutes, if I may, telling you about it, because it's a fascinating story. Dusseldorf, 1933. Max Stern had his PhD, went into the family business, the art business. It's all generally old masters. But he was young. He was an art historian. He wanted to bring modernism. He wanted young artists. He wanted to be contemporary. But the audience in Dusseldorf wasn't so contemporary. So he had to combine and accept the fact that what his customers wanted, what the gallery's customers wanted, was the classic German romanticism of the 19th century. Then, of course, the famous Nuremberg laws and all the other different statutes came in where remarkably Jews were just not allowed to be anything else but Jews. Couldn't be a doctor, couldn't be a gallery owner, couldn't be anything apart from Jews. going back to the strategy of denuding the Jewish people of its race, of its character. And he then tried to sell the business to his staff, but the local SS and local Nazi authorities were not having any of that. They had already guessed that. And eventually he got out, and his collection was sold in Lempert's auction house in Cologne, and it was auctioned, as it turned out, auction 392. Came to London. When Britain entered the war, he was then interned and actually went to Canada. And in Canada, after the war was over, he went back to do the only thing he was trained to do, which was to be an art dealer. And he got a job in a gallery called the Dominion Gallery in Montreal. The owner of the Dominion Gallery recognized that this man was so good, so talented, so knowledgeable, that if she didn't make him a partner, he would open up across the road, and then he would end up with the business and she wouldn't. So she was a shrewd lady, and she made him a partner. And eventually, of course, he bought the business, and he became Canada's most successful contemporary art gallery. He had the biggest stock of Rodins in North America. He had the biggest stock of Henry Moores in North America. He pioneered Canadian contemporary artists. And he was very successful. He married, they had no children. She died, he died. And he left his estate to the McGill University, Concordia University, both in Montreal, and the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Fine, very nice. And the estate very cleverly said there's no point in flooding the market with all this collection of art because it will only depress prices. It had no debt. So we'll just gently feed it into the market. And it was sufficiently wealthy that they employed researchers to go through all his papers, which he had already donated in his will to the National Library of Canada. And I can't tell you who it was. I mean, it'd be nice to say that it was an intern, but I don't know who it was. But somebody came up and said to somebody, excuse me, I found something. And somebody must have said, what have you found? And it says it's in German, and it says auction 392 in Lempert's gallery in Cologne. 1941, I think it was. Here was the auction documentation of the collection that was forcibly sold by the SS through Lempert's auction in Germany. His collection. Very unusual, unbelievably unusual to have such a record. Once they had this, they then could go through his files because they then knew what they were looking for, and they found illustrations of the works. They could piece together the jigsaw. And the state decided that they would actually set up the Max Stern Restitution Initiative, and they're going to try and get back 360 paintings. We were selected, Uri was selected 7 years ago to develop the exhibition that Concordia had created, which was a very fine exhibition, and to tour it around the world, so that we could actually tell a unique and rare story about NaziLooted art. Because the trouble with NaziLooted art is that out of the 250,000, 245,000, nobody knows. Nobody knows what it is. There are no records of it, because it was sold through, and then it may have been sold through 20 times since then. And the effect is amazing. And what we do actually, because we've now restituted 12 works, and we show 80 works in sepia canvas. So as somebody said, gosh, it's spooky, it's like ghosts. We said, that's exactly what they are. They're ghosts. They are artwork, but nobody knows where they are. And the works that have been found and restituted, we produce in full colour. So that the drama is remarkable. a great deal of legal precedents have been established through this exercise. And the title of my paper this evening is Facts, Law, and the Moral Prerogative. Well, the facts I've given you a little briefing about. Now I want to tell you a little bit about the law. And I think that probably the best way I can describe this to you is that I was in Glasgow, Kelvin Grove, and I was going round and somebody nudged me and I fell over and sort of nudged this beautiful vase, and I managed to catch it, probably priceless, you can imagine. Chair of the museum destroys worldwide famous. And because it was in Glasgow, this little sort of smoke came out of it and said, I am a genie. If it was in London, it would have been Bernadette, but as it's in Glasgow, we'll call it genie. And said, I'm so happy that you caught me. What would you like to know? I can tell you anything you'd like to know. I stood there and thought about it. I said, well, you know, what I'd really like to know is how do we get the warring factions in the Middle East to make peace? Spirit said, give me another. So I said, well, okay, can you explain to me how this whole NaziLooted Art, how the legal framework, how does it all fit in? It's such a huge jigsaw. I've been working on it now for 15 years and I can't work it out. And the genie said, let's talk peace in the Middle East. Because it's that complicated. The Washington Principles in 1998 were signed by 43 countries. But it was a protocol. Nothing legal about it at all. It was a protocol. It's what governments should do. But they don't have to, if they so choose not to, as many have so chosen not to. So Agnes, you're from Hungary. Well, Hungary, apart from its current extremely serious and worrying political situation, with fascism on the rise, are one of the countries that have done the least, only exceeded by Poland and a few other countries in the Russian Federation. I'm reliably informed that I cannot be sued if it's truthful. So, and it's truthful. Every country's own laws are sacrosanct. There is no general law. So in London, in Britain, there is a statute of limitations of, I think, 5 years. But that's different to Germany, or different to Holland, or different to Italy, or different to France. And in America, there is no statute of limitations. If an item is stolen in America and was recorded as stolen at the time of the Civil War, and it's gone through 50 legitimate, honest purchasers, they have no clean title, because the statute of limitations does not override the fact that it was stolen. And that, my friends, is why the majority of case law, the great progress, the star pieces, has all emanated principally from America. Because they have the actual avenues, the doors open for legal action. Now, I'm conscious that I'm almost past the time that I wanted to be, but I'm going to read you, if I may, just so you know that I'm not kidding you about how complicated the legal situation is. I just want to read you something which was from this is from Germany, by a man called Harold Koenig, and it's Art and Provenance Research. And I'm just going to read you just a few little excerpts so you can understand. It's not a minefield, it's a paddy field. It's just immersed with water. Nothing is clear. Everything is essentially optional. So when you talk about NaziLooted Art and restitution and the legality of it, to say that it's thin is an understatement. German museums and public authorities use provenance research as a tool for uncovering the factual material concerning the whereabouts of works of art and their legal owner between 1933 and 1945. The principles adopted during the Washington Conference on Holocaust-era assets call for a just and fair solution. Please note, it calls for a just. I'm afraid I can no longer see anybody on the right-hand side. No. So I'm only going to be able to read the left-hand side. It calls for a just and fair solution. Well, how many lawyers are in the house? I guess there's a few. Okay. Well, if you ever wanted to have something that didn't hold water and could make sure that the legal case could go on from now for another 300 years, and that is to argue on the basis of a just and fair solution. Where former owners of work of art confiscated by the Nazis can be identified. Note it doesn't say former owners' heirs, it just says former owners. The relevant authorities in Germany, the federal government, the lands, i.e. the federal estates, and the communities and cities, i.e. local authorities, affirmed their willingness to meet these standards in a declaration published in 1999. And I could go on. Each country is different. But let me tell you that Germany, for all the progress, is still the only country in Western Europe that legitimately sells recorded artworks that have been recorded as stolen, spoliated goods through their auction houses, willingly and regularly. And I was speaking at a conference in Florida, and the German Consul General was there, and spoke afterwards to say how much work, wonderful work they were doing. And they have done wonderful work. They have made significant progress. But found it extremely difficult to answer my question as to, with all this, how is it that I can walk into any auction house in Germany or buy on the internet works that are in all the major looted art registers, and I can buy freely and openly in Germany and have good title in Germany. So there's a long way to go. Okay, I want to stop there, because it's not, I've got other things to say, but I want to just stop there and open it out to questions, because I know people have got specific issues and some general issues. And to be honest with you, I could talk till a week next Tuesday, and you would be none the wiser, and I would be hoarse. So can we just have a little break there, and I'll answer any questions before I go on to the second part. No questions? Not even how long am I going to speak for?
I have a question.
Sure.
I saw the film. I don't know how realistic it was, the monument men, but it looked as if in the film there was a race between the West and Russia to try and retrieve as many paintings as possible. Did Russia, in fact, when it moved into Berlin and the other countries, take in a lot of the artwork, and have they released any of it?
By the truckload. By trainloads, and I don't mean a carriage on the train. They had special trains because it was trophy art. It was, you know, they were a conquering nation. Nothing new in this, by the way. Please don't think that looted art is new. It's the scale and the context that is new. You just need to look in any national gallery of any country, and you will find in one way or another art that could be described as looted. But it's trophy art. If you're in a war and you win, then you get the trophies. So the answer is yes, and much of it was held in the Beige museums in Russia, and then when all this got hot, all of a sudden it disappeared. Off display, down into the basement, into the stores, and then as only the Russians can do, they denied it ever existed even though it happened to be on display 3 weeks ago, what was on display 3 weeks ago? So the answer is that Poland knock on Germany's door, governmental, could we have our art back, please? And Germany knocks on Russia's door, excuse me, could we have our art back, please? It's literally as simple as that. Each country has got a claim on another country. So it's huge. So the answer is the Russians have got a huge amount of spoliated goods that they simply now deny they got, which is fascinating given the fact that many people have seen it and been toured around it. Any other questions before I... Yes, please.
Would it be possible?
Sorry.
Would it be possible to publish on the internet, it may already be done, a full detailed list of looted art so as to put moral pressure on the owners?
Well, the answer to that is yes, and yes, it has been done. There are many lists, and in fact, only in the last, I guess, 6 weeks, the V&A published a complete list of all the work that was in the degenerate art exhibitions, because there was more than one, by the way, there was a series. The Claims Conference produced a list. Lost Art DE, which is a German body of recording spoliated goods, they produced a list. In Britain, it's called lootedart.com. It's the council, Anne Webber and David Lewis run it superbly well, and it's a marvelous website, by the way, www.lootedart.com, because it literally brings together all the activities around the world, and it's fascinating to read. So the answer is, yes, there are many lists, but it doesn't necessarily bring anything pressure to bear on the owners of the art, for 2 reasons. Principally, one is because they don't necessarily have to read it. So you can publish what you like if they don't read it. And the second thing is that the people who own the works aren't actually that enthusiastic about finding whether it's spoliated and they should give it back. That includes museums, unfortunately. But don't think also that it's only about museums. Museums are the tip of the iceberg. It's personal collections. Imagine 250,000 works being distributed around the world. They must be sitting somewhere. They may be sitting in your home. They may be hanging on your walls. Worth having a think. Well, one was sitting on my wall. And nobody, by the way, ever asked, nobody ever asked me or told me about the provenance of any artwork. I've been collecting art for 40 years. Nobody ever told me the provenance of any of the work that I own, and I never asked, because I didn't know to ask. It was only after the Washington Principles I first started to read about it and think, oops. Jim?
It's a question based on not having enough information, but what's the most iconic, symbolic, expensive, valuable piece of art that has been discovered? And the second part of my question is there a reputed piece of art or collected item that a family has said they lost or was taken from them that just hasn't been recovered? And again, what would be the most iconic item in that category?
Okay. Well, at the risk of offending a member of Her Majesty's government, I'm not going to tell you. You lost the election. You lost the election. Oh, yes, well. Nothing is forever.
You've been very busy.
Yeah, nothing is forever. I meant the House of Commons, but you're quite right. The answer is I'm not going to tell you. And I'll tell you why I'm not going to tell. I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay.
Because what Ben Uri is actually all about is actually making the point that the issue is not about its commercial value. The issue is not about its iconic appeal. The issue is that to the person whose picture it was hanging over their mantelpiece, that is the great value. It's valued, not value, that's important. And that's why I'm not going to tell you, because I don't want this discussion to be about the great iconic works that you can see in the New Gallery in New York. Because It's about us, it's about our families, it's about ordinary people's loved arts that we grew up with, they grew up with, and they were simply ripped off the walls. Sir?
If someone knows they have a piece of stolen art and you want to refund it, is there a fund set up to compensate that person?
One of the $60,000 questions. The problem with the whole issue of spoliation is that there is a long list of $60,000 questions. The answer is, in the United Kingdom, there is a spoliation advisory committee, but it doesn't operate for private people, to my knowledge. It only operates for institutions, where it will then take a view as to how the problem should be solved. But it is the age-existing problem. The innocent purchaser, the good faith purchaser. If I bought a picture for £1 million in good faith, and 20 years later I discovered that my picture, by the way, is now worth £10 million, but actually it's now been discovered that it was stolen, it was looted, it's now been recorded, the moral imperative is that I should give it back. But there was another moral imperative that says, well, why shouldn't I be compensated? I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't rip it off the wall. And we have not got a solution to that. And that's one of the big quandaries, not from the museum sector, but from the private sector, where the majority of these works are, is how many people are actually going to give it back? How many people are going to look to see whether they have something which they shouldn't have by accident, not design, and then give it back? The commercial compromise that is often made when a work goes to a Western auction house, note I say a Western auction house, is that the auction house recognises it and they check to see whether it's stolen. They then bring the parties together. Even 5 years ago, they would still possibly have given the artwork back, but cultural pressure has now forced them to, generally speaking, keep the artwork, even though there's no legal basis of them keeping the artwork, to try and force a conclusion. And very often the artwork is sold and the proceeds are split. So there was a question there. Yeah.
There's another aspect. It's reckoned that a number of works of art were taken with them by Nazis fleeing Germany, especially when they went to South America. And I live in Brazil. And one of the problems we face there is that in other countries, if somebody discovers, a third generation discovers a work of art in their basement and they bring it to Sotheby's or Christie's, as you say, Christie's or Sotheby's will say, look, this is stolen. Let's negotiate or get the lawyers involved. The problem is in the South American countries where there are networks of German art dealers or dealers dealing with this stuff. It will never come into the auction. They'll never bring it to the auction house. So it's impossible to discover where, if this stuff exists or where it is. You've just given me an idea. How about your museum? How about advertising rewards for people can discover this stuff. They don't have money, the third generation, but if making a campaign, especially in the internet, sponsored by your museum, that if people discover works of art or receive leads of works of art, a fund, an independent fund will give a reward if it turns out that it's been stolen from Nazi art and gets back to its owners or their heirs.
It's a great idea. There's only one little problem.
Yeah.
And that's the two words that you just said in that very wonderful idea. It's called independent fund. Because we have to get somebody to pay for it. What Ben Uri has done is it's lobbied through both museum agencies and various major Jewish institutions that a fund should be established. But then you have the issue as to which country is it? Does it cover one country? Does it cover all countries? Who are the adjudicators? And as the famous joke in the record says, it's best that we don't mix it. So, but you're absolutely right. Ultimately, until there is a facility in place to address the innocent purchaser, the good faith purchaser, then this work will continue to be held privately rather than publicly. Okay, I'm conscious that everybody is tired, they want to have a cup of tea, but I do want to ask for your perseverance for a few more minutes. because I need you to help me on something particular. Okay, can we? This was the Washington Principles Conference, or the Washington Conference in 1998, led by Stuart Eisenstadt, who, by the way, without Stuart Eisenstadt, the contribution that he's made in the whole issue of restitution would simply be, it would be floundering without his effect. He was in Clinton's government, and he was the guy who brought together the Swiss and German insurance companies and made them an offer they couldn't refuse, and they didn't refuse it, and hence why all the reparations there, and also stimulated and brought together governments for the Washington Principles. So whatever else, we should be very grateful to Stu. Next one. This was the Terezin conference in 2009, which I went to. It was my first intergovernmental conference. It was remarkable. I now know why. Be careful what I say. So many distinguished MPs and MSPs. But I guess the world of politics works differently from the world of business. Next one. I go back to the people. Next one. Yom Hashoah, in a post-analog and digital age. I don't know what's going to happen in 50 years. I don't actually know what's happening now half the time. So, and I guess we'll have, if babies aren't born with something implanted in their finger or their, I don't know, their knuckles or their forehead or something that's going to be the computer of the age, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that we've got to find a way to make sure that the lessons of history have an impact on future history. And that's why I need your help, because that's the area that troubles me most. Next one, please. Okay, these are one of my great disappointments, that I was not invited to be joining George Clooney and various other movie. It's an interesting movie. It gives you a little bit of flavour of what was going on. Next one. The Queen. Well, pretty close. Helen Mirren. Who will star as Maria Altman in the famous case which has set the press alight over the years with the Climps, which were bought by Ronald Lauder and now in the Newark Gallery, but I couldn't possibly refer that back to your last question. But it'll be a major movie. Next one. And Schindler's List. I want to stop there for a second. I can't remember what the cinema was. Johnny, you remember. What was the cinema that was a bit arty? Mum and Dad used to go. The Cosmo. I thought it was Como, and I thought, it can't be Como. I go on my holidays to Como. It can't must be the Cosmo. Okay. In the Cosmo, I remember watching a heart-rendering, emotionally mind-blowing movie about the Holocaust, which was one of many. And they were all in cinemas like the Cosmo or whatever the small little boutique cinemas, the arty. They were all low-budget arty films. And they were tough. They were factual. And not many people saw them. And not many people could sit through them. I do a lecture called the Spielberg Question. And it's about debating how does one communicate the Holocaust. Because it's not just about communicating it effectively, which was the Ben-Uri question, going all the way back to 2000. Ben-Uri could communicate effectively the talents, the contribution that Jewish artists made. But if it's only talking to a Jewish audience, it's talking to a small percentage of 0.05% of the great British public. What's the point? So that's why we turned ourselves into a national institution, with one of our contexts being our cultural heritage. I'm told, according to Google, which is of course everybody's doing of information, that over 1 billion people have seen Schindler's List. And the question is, does one sacrifice part of fact, part of documentative, to communicate to an audience of simply unquantifiable multiplication? And I think the answer is yes, if it maintains the integrity of the subject matter it's addressing. And Schindler's List did that. It's not factual, it's fiction, but it's based on facts. But without Schindler's List, children, young people, young adults, middle-aged adults, and senior adults, God help me, I'm a senior adult, we would not know as much, or maybe I would, but most people would not have known as much about the Holocaust without Schindler's List as they did before. Now, Scotland, I think, is ahead of the game. Britain is certainly ahead of the game, if I'm still allowed to make that journey. Because our governments actually support the issue of Holocaust education. Scotland, I understand from my researchers, they send students across to Auschwitz. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. But it's marvelous that it's been done. But actually, in the scale of things, it's still tiny. How does one address this? Which is why I'm talking to you tonight. It's really the core of what I really wanted to talk to you tonight. Because Schindler's List talks to 1 billion people, left an impression with 1 billion people, and will continue to do so. Next one. This is my greatest worry. Mr. Wikipedia. You know why it's my greatest worry? I actually didn't know anything about Wikipedia because I'm a dinosaur. My knowledge of technology is equal to my knowledge of, I don't know, Ethiopian agriculture. But we have researchers in the museum. We put scholarship first, and we had a volunteer who is wonderful, exceptionally able, and we found that some of the information on an artist was wrong. You have to understand that's a cardinal sin. In the museum world, that is a cardinal sin. Nothing less than excellence is accepted. Scholarship is everything. And we got it wrong. And when we researched and found out who and why, the information came from Wikipedia. I had no idea what Wikipedia was. We're now no longer able, nobody in the museum is allowed to touch Wikipedia. Because Wikipedia not only is the source of information for the majority of school children. Where are our colleagues from Calderwood? You're not at school, you might be the teacher. Where are our young colleagues? How often do you use Wikipedia? A little bit, sometimes?
Yes.
Yes. I think yes. You would be very odd if you didn't. Wikipedia, being the source of all knowledge for our future generations, can be changed. The issue of accuracy is secondary to Wikipedia. The issue of Wikipedia is about who altered it last. But you ask any school kid what they're actually, where their principal source of information is, where do they start off? They go onto Wikipedia.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I've got 2 young girls here who went to Auschwitz from school locally.
Yes.
And I've just asked one of them, and go on.
We're told to stay away from it because it can be altered.
Yes! Yes! If only that was a majority view. And the point that I'm making is that we live in a digital age, never mind a post-digital age. I mean, we had a situation only days ago where the Hillsborough disaster, where the site was wickedly changed by people within the government I mean, I don't mean the politicians, but within overall government, on their computers. That is a huge worry. Because nothing stops the deniers. The internet is the new scholarship, and that will continue. Next, please. And that's our audience. Next, please. And now you ask, what on earth is David doing, showing a picture of Christmas lunch in the middle of this? Because it's a family occasion, and it's been going for 2,000 years. Next, please. Well, at least it's a Seder night, you say. It's a family occasion, and it's been going for 3,000 years. And this is where I need your help. Because Yom Hashoah is 63 years old. I think it was Chow Lai after the Cultural Revolution when somebody said to him, Mr. Foreign Minister, do you think the Cultural Revolution will work? And he said, well, what do you think of the French Revolution? He said, too early to tell. Yom Hashoah is 63 years old. It's too early to tell whether it has legs. But Christmas lunch is 2,000 years old. The Seder is 3,000 years old. And maybe there's something in it. Because I don't know anymore. Life cycles in business, I'm from the business world, the corporate world. A life cycle in the business when I started in the corporate world was 25 to 35 years. Today it's 5 to 10 years. The speed of change is simply unbelievable. Yet, 80%, 79% of all Jews, according to the JPR research, attended a Seder. More than go to synagogue, more than do Shabbos lights, more than keep kosher. So if we dissect the successful model, what do we find? We find it's family. The family is based on food and storytelling. What is Christmas lunch, if not food and storytelling? The Seder is about our religion's being. It's the start of our religion. It gave us our whole ethos, not just our religion. And it's interesting, also in their research, what is the most important criteria to the Jewish community? 67%, more than any other criteria, said, I can't read it, strong moral and ethical behavior over everything else. So there's hope. And why is NaziLooted Art so important? Because there was 250,000 paintings, of which still 245,000 are circulation. And in 100 years' time, and in 200 years' time, and in 300 years' time, there will still be discoveries, both innocent and that not so innocent. But if we can make that work for us, not just so that somebody who might be the 17th generation of heirs, but if we can make it work for us to actually put it back into its context of why it's NaziLooted Art, what happened through these years, then NaziLooted Art has a whole new strength in its own right. Because it's the context that's important. It's not the value of the work or even that it's valued. It's the overall context. Next one. Yom Hashoah 2064. What, how, and where? I'm very grateful for your time. Thank you.